Imagine walking into like a late night kebab shop, right? And the simple act of just ordering a chicken dinner triggers a mental spiral so severe that you end up lying about your entire life just to escape the room.
Oh, man. Yeah, for most of us, that's just a complete nightmare scenario.
Exactly. But for 43-year-old Chasey Delaney, I mean, that's just Tuesday.
It really is. It's such a jarring scene to read, and it's exactly the kind of gritty, just completely unfiltered reality that she throws at you right out of the gate in her 2026 essay collection, Moon Talking.
Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we are spending our time inside Delaney's mind, which is quite a place to be.
It really is, because she introduces herself not as, some polished memoirist with a neat narrative arc. She calls herself a schizophrenic old woman with this incredibly sharp Mancunian wit.
And absolutely zero desire to pander to her audience.
Whatsoever.
I have to admit, when I first opened this collection, I really wasn't sure I could stick with it.
Yeah.
I mean, she literally warns the reader in the introduction that she has what was the quote?
The emotional depth of a fucking parking ticket.
Yes, a parking ticket. She claims she has zero sympathy for anyone reading her pages. And it just made me wonder, why should you, as a reader, spend your time on someone who claims to feel nothing at all?
Well, that is the brilliant trap she sets for you. I mean, she establishes this facade immediately, basically daring you to take her at face value. She wants you to think she's stone-faced and just devoid of feeling.
Right.
But the text itself, constantly betrays that claim.
Yeah, I saw that play out almost instantly with that late night food run we mentioned. Let's actually look at that scene, because on the surface, it just looks like a woman being bizarrely rude to a cashier at a takeaway place.
The Kebab Lab.
The Kebab Lab.
Right.
So it's midnight, she walks in for a 3-piece chicken meal, and the young woman working the counter is, chatty, bilingual, just trying to make some friendly small talk.
Which is a completely standard social script for most of us. You just smile and nod. But for Delaney, who is managing early onset paranoid schizophrenia, this is a high stakes, terrifying navigation.
She describes her face feeling hotter than the food sweating inside the plastic bag. Her hands are clammy. She's desperately wishing she had brought her headphones so she could just stare at her screen like a sheep and avoid the interaction entirely.
Yeah, she just wants to be invisible.
And instead of just saying, oh, I'm between jobs, she spins this massive, chaotic web of lies. She claims she's retired.
Which to her is sort of a half-truth, because she was actually signed off sick from her career as a legal secretary due to her severe mental illness.
Right, but the Kebab Lab worker obviously doesn't know any of that.
No, the worker just assumes Delaney is living off some fat government pension, rubbing her fingers together to mime cash.
And Delaney just absolutely panics at that point. She starts air typing on an invisible keyboard to explain her past secretarial work.
Which is such a funny, awkward visual.
It really is.
Yeah.
She inflates the year she worked from 10 to 16 and then just randomly blurts out that she makes DJ mixes in her spare time just to sound interesting or normal.
It's wild.
Why does she react so extremely to simple small talk, though? I mean, why go to those lengths?
Well, to understand that reaction, you really have to look at how paranoia and sensory overload operate in a highly stimulated environment. For someone with her condition, the brain's filtering mechanism is essentially compromised.
Okay.
So a chatty cashier isn't just slightly annoying, it's an unpredictable variable. Delaney feels this terrifying lack of control over her own mind, so she desperately tries to control the narrative that the cashier has of her.
Even if that narrative is a complete fabrication about DJ mixes.
Exactly. It's all about control.
She actually paints a very vivid picture of what happens when she can't control her environment like that. She explains why she had to leave her office job in the first place, and it involves, of all things, a water cooler.
Oh, yeah, this part is intense.
She writes that if she were still in an office having a bad day, she might see a colleague laughing on the phone through those glass office walls, and immediately her paranoia would convince her they were mocking her.
And that's exactly where the auditory hallucinations would kick in. They provide this false confirmation of the paranoia. Her brain literally manufactures the sounds of them mocking her.
Which is terrifying. And she casually notes that in that scenario, she'd probably end up shoving the colleague's face into the water cooler, leaving an imprint like a Madame Tussauds waxwork.
Or worse.
Yeah, or worse, smearing feces on the photocopier. It's so graphic and shocking, but she says it so matter-of-factly.
She uses that shocking imagery specifically to show you the stakes. If she misreads a social cue in the kebab lab, she doesn't just risk being awkward, she risks a devastating, highly public break from reality.
Wow, yeah, so her stone-faced exterior
Right, the very thing she calls having the emotional depth of a parking ticket.
is actually just a survival tactic.
100%.
You know, it reminds me of a squid deploying ink in the ocean.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Because all those awkward small talk lies, the fake DJ hobbies, the cold glaring, it's not malicious deception at all. It's a panic defense mechanism. She's just shooting out ink to cloud the water so she can escape an overwhelming situation.
Without exposing her incredibly fragile underbelly. Yes, that is precisely what she's doing. She knows her resting bitch face keeps the threat level low. People leave you alone when you look unapproachable.
But the thing is, that kebab lab survival instinct, where she's sacrificing her reputation just to maintain a shred of safety, doesn't stop when she leaves the shop. It actually scales up.
It does.
Because if she's this terrified of losing control over a chicken meal at age 43, just imagine her panic when she looks at the ultimate loss of control, which is getting older.
Right, which leads us straight into a section she titles FACT, or Falling and Age Concerns Talks. And the trigger for this anxiety is actually something very ordinary. Her 60-year-old mother falls off a ladder and cuts her elbow.
Yeah, and Delaney zeroes in on this grim linguistic shift that happens as we age. Because when you're young, you fell over and everyone just dusts you off and has a laugh about it.
Yeah, you're clumsy.
Right, but you hit a certain age and suddenly people are whispering in these terrified hushed tones like, oh, she's had a fall.
She's had a fall. Yeah, because that phrase represents the first domino in the loss of physical independence. And for Delaney, whose independence is already heavily subsidized and managed by the government because of her schizophrenia, the idea of entering the institutionalized social care system is just waking nightmare.
She goes on this long rant about the UK care system, and she sets up a really sharp contrast. She describes people who worked their whole lives, paid off their mortgages, lived frugally in what she calls drafty big gaffs.
Basically, these massive aging houses filled with antique French dressers and double locked pantries.
Exactly, people who hoard every penny for retirement. But the bitter irony she points out is what happens when dementia or severe physical decline inevitably hits.
The system just drains all that accumulated wealth to pay for their care.
Yeah, she points out that the wealthy homeowner who saved their whole life will end up being forced to sell everything just to land in the exact same nursing home bed as someone who never worked a day in their life.
She pictures herself chilling in some low-budget reject NHS facility next to a guy she calls Percy PIP Face.
Oh my God, yes. A guy living entirely off his personal independence payment disability benefits who, according to her, pisses his pants every time he farts.
Now, Delaney frames this entirely as a selfish complaint. She writes that she's angry because she assumed her care home would be this fun, low-budget reject bin, and now she's horrified that these rich, formerly independent people are going to invade her space and ruin the vibe.
I really struggled with her framing there, though. I mean, she claims she's just being cynical and selfish. But if you look at the actual words she uses to describe those wealthy people, she says they should be traveling the world, frittering away their savings in the sun while they still have their faculties, rather than hoarding it for a care home. That doesn't sound selfish to me at all. It sounds like a profound, furious empathy. Like she is enraged on their behalf.
He really is, because she is pointing out the ultimate illusion of control. I mean, wealthy people often believe their money gives them autonomy over how their story ends. But Delaney, who has never had that illusion of autonomy, she sees clearly that the system comes for everyone's dignity equally in the end.
Regardless of whether you lived a responsible life or a chaotic one.
Exactly.
And since she knows the system will eventually strip her of control, she guards her current autonomy fiercely, especially when it comes to managing her own mind. Which is why she reveals that she gave up alcohol and cannabis, 15 years ago?
Yes, and this is a crucial piece of her puzzle. Because she didn't get sober for typical health reasons or 12-step program, she stopped because those substances directly trigger her psychosis and send her into severe paranoia.
And to illustrate just how absolutely necessary that control is, she shares a story from a bender back in her 20s. And it is a wild ride.
It really is.
She gets kicked out of her mother's house in Blackpool and ends up in a car headed to Wales with a guy she barely knows, like a friends with benefits situation.
Right, and they move into this crowded house share, and immediately the dynamic is toxic. She's an English woman in a very insular Welsh community. She's confident but highly vulnerable, and the other women in the house instantly view her as an outsider.
And a threat. The tension in this story is just palpable. She describes this terrifying car ride through winding mountain roads. The local girl driving the car has thick glasses, is half drunk, smoking a spliff, and purposefully driving erratically near the cliff edges.
Just to test Delaney's nerve.
Exactly. Delaney is stuck in the back seat, completely aware that she is trapped. She has no money, nowhere else to go, and the guy she came with is just too weak to stand up to his friends.
So she tries to buy her way out of the hostility. She gets her hands on some unexpected cash and buys a massive liter bottle of vodka for a house party, hoping to share it and win some goodwill.
But the driver, the girl who hates her, insists on holding the plastic bag with the vodka in the front seat.
Oh, this part is so brutal.
When they finally park, the girl passes the bag back. Delaney steps out of the car, and the bottom of the bag just gives way. The entire liter bottle smashes all over the concrete patio.
And Delaney realizes instantly that the girl had purposefully sliced the bottom of the plastic bag with her fingernails before handing it over. It was deliberate sabotage.
Delaney refers to it as a cunt's trick.
It's such a petty move.
It is, but the fallout is devastating for her. The entire party turns on Delaney because there is broken glass everywhere. Her guy friend refuses to replace her drink out of embarrassment. No one offers to drive her to a shop.
So she is totally alienated.
Spending the entire night nursing a single can of Vimto soda from the fridge while everyone else gets absolutely trashed around her.
It's an agonizing night of isolation. The next day, she finally uses her initiative to call an old fling she calls Mr. Magic Hands to drive down from Manchester and rescue her.
Which is such an amazing detail. She mentions he smells like imperial leather soap and his bed sheets look like a grandmother's curtains, but she is thrilled to see him. But, when Delaney looks back at that smashed bottle of vodka, her takeaway really surprised me. She calls the sabotage a spiteful blessing.
Yes, she totally reframes the entire event.
Wait, I have a hard time buying that from her,
Yeah.
honestly. She was publicly humiliated. She had her only leverage, the alcohol, destroyed on purpose by someone who hated her. How is that a blessing? Isn't she just retroactively trying to make herself feel better about an incredibly traumatic night where she was totally powerless?
Well, it's tempting to read it as rationalization, sure, but you have to look at the biochemical mechanics of her schizophrenia. Alcohol severely amplifies her paranoia and aggression.
Oh, right.
So if she had consumed a liter of vodka in a house full of hostile strangers who were already mocking her, her brain would have escalated that threat exponentially.
Like, it wouldn't have just cried in the corner.
Exactly. She admits that if she had been drunk, she would have violently assaulted the girl who cut the bag. She says she would have physically smashed her face in.
Wow. And she says she would have been arrested in a strange town, thrown in a cell, and essentially proved them all right to hate her.
So that petty, cruel trick actually saved her from a violent psychotic break and a jail sentence.
It requires an immense amount of self-awareness to look at a moment of profound victimization and recognize that it saved you from your own worst impulses. I mean, it completely shatters her claim of having the emotional depth of a parking ticket.
It really does. And the contrast between those chaotic stories and the final section of her book is jarring because in one chapter she's talking about smearing feces on a photocopier and smashed vodka bottles.
Yeah.
And in the next, she's sitting alone by an unplugged fake wood burner in her house. It's the middle of the night. She's blowing cigarette smoke out a crack in the back door, looking up at a swelling crescent moon.
And she is thinking about a figure she simply calls the MUSE.
Right. We've spent the whole book looking at her social armor in the kebab lab and her behavioral armor staying sober in Wales. And here she finally exposes her unprotected core, which is her unrequited love for this elusive MUSE.
She writes, "The moon is out, but he's not in it." She knows he is asleep somewhere, completely oblivious to her existence, but their actual interactions in reality were so sparse and honestly awkward.
Very awkward.
She recounts this video call they had years prior. He pops on the screen, says hello, and Delaney, who was hiding off camera out of sheer panic, just blurts out, "Show me your balls."
Oh my goodness.
And he immediately hangs up. And that was the extent of it.
It's incredibly funny, but it's also deeply tragic. It highlights her absolute inability to bridge the gap between the profound poetic love she feels internally and her complete lack of knowing how to express it healthily to another human being.
She turns to a quote from Maya Angelou to make sense of this, actually. Angelou said, "You should never take clothes from a naked person." Essentially asking, how can you trust the love of someone who has no love for themselves?
And Delaney turns that quote inward. She realizes that because she didn't love herself, her own heart was like a derelict home. She couldn't invite the MUSC or anyone else inside because the place was literally uninhabitable.
So all of this obsessive romanticizing of the MUSE, it wasn't actually about him at all.
He was entirely a proxy.
A training ground. Because her mind was so walled off by the trauma of her illness, she had to practice projecting massive amounts of care outwardly toward this distant, inaccessible MUS, just to prove to herself that her emotional machinery still worked.
Yes.
She had to know she was capable of love.
So that she could eventually gather all that intense care and turn it backward toward herself. At the very end of the essay, she writes that she finds herself crying, but she makes it explicitly clear that she isn't shedding tears over losing the MUS.
She is crying for the younger versions of herself. The girl who was terrified and alienating people in the kebab shop. The girl who was isolated with a can of Vimto in Wales. She is finally extending that deep, profound empathy to her own past.
The woman who opened the book by claiming to have no depth has actually dug to the very bedrock of her own psyche to rebuild her foundation.
When you look at this entire journey, I mean, from the sweaty panic in Kebab Lab to the quiet realization by the back door under the moon, it challenges every assumption we make about the faces people present to the world.
It does, because we all have our version of the Kebab Lab defense. A facade we throw up when the sensory overload of life gets to be too much.
We really do. And I want you to think about your own resting bitch face, your own parking ticket persona. When you're feeling overwhelmed or out of your depth, what gritty humor or tough exterior are you using to protect your most vulnerable fears?
It's definitely worth examining what we are trying to keep safe behind those walls.
And building on Delaney's revelation with her MUSE, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today. If Chasey Delaney's intense, unrequited obsession with a man who barely knew her was actually just her mind's subconscious trick to teach her how to heal her own past trauma, how many of our own intense external obsessions, our deepest grudges, or our most frustrating relationships are actually just mirrors? Are they desperately trying to show us the exact parts of ourselves that need to be forgiven? It really makes you wonder. The next time someone shows you a parking ticket, maybe you should ask yourself what kind of depth they're really trying to hide.